It was supposed to be a perfect day. My son Max's 9th birthday. The age where imagination still outweighs reality and hope feels infinite. The living room buzzed with relatives sipping coffee, laughter echoing off the walls as if it were any other family gathering. But there he sat, my father, at the center of it all, his smug smile hinting at something darker beneath the surface. When Max tore into that pristine white box marked Apple, anticipation lit up his face like fireworks on the 4th of July. I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. Inside wasn't an iPhone but a jagged rock, cold, mocking, cruel. Only good boys get toys, Dad sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. My heart sank as Max's eyes widened in confusion, then shame. It wasn't just about the rock. It was about power, control, humiliation wrapped neatly in cellophane for everyone to laugh at. And they did laugh. Everyone laughed except me and Max. His small hands trembled, clutching the box like it carried not a joke, but a verdict. You're not enough. In that moment, time froze. Memories slammed into me. The same cruel pranks, the same hollow laughter from decades ago when I was the one sitting in Max's seat. Except now, it wasn't just me being crushed under my father's toxic idea of fun. It was my son, my boy. Watching him shrink before my eyes ignited something primal inside me. A rage so fierce it felt like fire coursing through my veins. This wasn't tradition or tough love. This was abuse masquerading as humor. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't going to end here. Not today, not ever again. Growing up in that house was like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Every step had to be calculated, every word measured, because one wrong move and Dad would pounce, with his razor-sharp sarcasm disguised as fatherly wisdom. He never hit us. No, he didn't need to. His words cut deeper than any slap ever could. I remember the Christmas when I was 12, standing in front of the tree, clutching my report card with trembling hands. "A.B. Really?" he said, leaning back in his chair, sipping scotch like some kind of king holding court. "Your brother gets straight A's without even trying. You're just average." That word, average, stuck to me like tar, suffocating and impossible to scrub off. It wasn't just grades. It was everything. At family dinners, while Emily dazzled everyone with her piano recitals or debate trophies, I was the afterthought, the punchline. "Oh, Alex is doing fine," Dad would say, waving a hand dismissively. "He's keeping himself busy." Busy, as if my life's purpose was to stay out of sight. But I tried. God, how I tried. I worked 3 jobs in high school, saved every penny, earned scholarships, all while hearing him whisper behind my back about how I was lucky to get into college, not smart enough to earn it. Even when I built my company from scratch, sweating blood and tears, he called me decent. Never brilliant, never driven, just decent. And now, watching Max shrink under his gaze at the birthday party, it all came rushing back. The shame, the desperate need for approval that never came. I saw myself in Max, the same confusion, the same hurt, but this time, there was something else. Anger. Pure, white-hot rage. Because I realized what Dad truly was. A coward hiding behind tradition and control. He thought humiliation was tough love, but it was poison, a slow drip that seeped into your soul until you believed you were worthless. And now he was trying to pour that same venom into my son. No, not again. This cycle ended here. The laughter that had filled the room just moments before now felt like shards of glass slicing through my chest. Max was still gripping the rock, his small hands trembling as if it were a live grenade about to detonate. I could see the heat rising in his cheeks, the way his shoulders curled inward like he was trying to protect himself from an invisible storm. "You think this is funny?" I snapped, my voice cutting through the lingering chuckles like a blade. The room froze, every pair of eyes turning toward me, some wide with shock, others narrowing defensively. But I didn't care anymore. Something inside me had cracked open, and what spilled out was years of buried anger, resentment, and pain. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out an envelope, slapping it onto the table with enough force to make the coffee cups rattle. "Do you want to know why this isn't just some harmless prank?" My father leaned back in his chair, squinting at me as though I were overreacting, a child throwing a tantrum for attention. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, is proof that you've been using Max's social security number to open credit cards since he was 5 years old. The silence that followed was deafening. Even my mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she turned to stare at my father. His face went pale, but he tried to brush it off. "You can't prove that," he muttered, though his voice wavered like a house of cards on the verge of collapse. But I wasn't finished. Turning to Emily, I dropped another bombshell. "And you," I said, my tone icy. "You dipped into Max's college fund last year. $2,200 for your Bali yoga retreat." Her jaw dropped, panic flashing in her eyes as she stammered. I needed it for Ellie's therapy." I cut her off sharply. "Don't lie. I saw your Instagram posts. Healing my inner child on the beach. Cute caption. Paid for by my actual child's education." Her husband shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick enough to choke on. Max stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. His face was flushed, his breathing shallow. "Why does everyone hate me?" he whispered, tears streaming down his face before he bolted out of the room. My heart stopped. I ran after him, calling his name, but when I found him hunched over in the hallway, clutching his stomach, I realized something was terribly wrong. He was hyperventilating, his body shaking uncontrollably. "Call 911, I shouted, my voice breaking as I cradled him in my arms. The paramedics arrived quickly, their questions blending into a blur as they loaded him into the ambulance. All I could think about was how far we'd fallen, from laughter to betrayal to hospital sirens, and how none of this should have ever happened. The war didn't end when we walked out of that house. It had only just begun. Within days, my phone became a weapon aimed at me. Anonymous texts flooded in, each one more venomous than the last. "You're dead to this family. How dare you shame your father? Max will never forgive you for this." And then came the threats, subtle at first, but escalating quickly. A car parked outside our home late at night, its headlights off, but engine idling. Strange knocks on the door when no one was there. I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed, every shadow feeling like it carried malice. My wife, Sarah, couldn't take it anymore. "This isn't what I signed up for," she said one evening, her voice trembling as she packed a suitcase. "Your father is dying, Alex. The court case broke him. Your sister won't even speak to us anymore. Everyone blames you." She wasn't wrong. They did blame me, but watching her walk away felt like being gut-punched. And then came the call from work. My boss's tone was clipped, professional, but underneath it, I could hear disappointment. "Alex, this scandal, it's affecting the company. Clients are asking questions. We can't have this kind of attention right now. Translation, you're fired." Just like that, everything I'd worked for, the promotions, the late nights, the sacrifices, was gone. All because I chose to stand up for Max. It would have been easier to stay silent, to let them laugh and steal and humiliate. But silence was a luxury I couldn't afford, not anymore. Things got worse before they got better. One morning, as I was making breakfast for Max, there was a sharp knock at the door. 2 men in dark suits stood there, their badges gleaming under the porch light. FBI agents. They wanted to talk about my father, not just the identity theft or the credit cards, but something bigger: money laundering, shell companies tied to his accounts, transactions linked to offshore banks. My stomach churned as they asked if I knew anything about it. Of course I didn't, but guilt by association hung heavy in the air. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as the agents left. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. By noon, someone had spray-painted "thief" across my garage door. Max saw it all, the stress etched into my face, the way I flinched at every unexpected sound. He tried to stay strong, but I caught him staring out the window sometimes, his little hands clutching the edge of the sill like he was waiting for something, or someone, to come back. "Dad," he asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper, "are we bad people?" My heart shattered. "No, buddy," I said, pulling him close. "We're the ones trying to make things right." The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as if it could crack at any moment. My father sat stiffly in his blazer, trying to project confidence, but I could see the cracks forming, his knuckles white from gripping the armrests, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. Emily, on the other hand, was a wreck. Her once immaculate appearance was gone, her makeup smeared, hair unkempt, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. When my lawyer presented the bank statements showing how my father had used Max's social security number to open credit lines since he was 5, the room seemed to hold its breath. "This isn't just negligence," my lawyer said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is exploitation of a minor for personal gain." The judge didn't blink, didn't flinch, just scribbled notes that felt heavier than anvils. Then came the surveillance footage from the birthday party. The laughter, the rock, my father's smug smirk. It all played out on the screen like some twisted sitcom. But when the video zoomed in on Max's face, the confusion, the hurt, the tears, it wasn't funny anymore. It was devastating. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. My mother, sitting beside my father, buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. She'd always been the peacemaker, smoothing over Dad's cruelty with soft words and excuses, but now she couldn't hide. The truth was laid bare, ugly and undeniable. Things escalated quickly after that. During recess, I got a frantic call from Emily's husband. "She's in the hospital," he stammered. She took too many pills." My stomach dropped. Guilt clawed at me, but anger burned brighter. Hadn't she thought about Max when she stole $2,200 from his future? Hadn't she considered the damage she was doing? I drove to the hospital anyway, partly out of obligation, partly because I needed answers. When I walked into her room, she was pale, hooked up to machines, her breathing shallow. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling like it held all the secrets. Back in court, the drama continued. My mother collapsed during testimony, clutching her chest and gasping for air. Paramedics rushed in, sirens wailing as they wheeled her out. "A stroke," they said later. "Stress-induced." The family I once knew was unraveling before my eyes, thread by thread. Yet, amidst the chaos, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about justice. It was about breaking free from the toxic web we'd been entangled in for generations. And though the pain was excruciating, I knew there was no turning back. The gavel came down with a final, resounding crack, a sound that felt like the closing of a chapter one never wanted to revisit. We won. The judge's ruling was clear. My father and sister would pay for what they had done. Emily was ordered to repay the $2,200 she stole from Max's college fund, plus hefty fines. My father faced not only financial penalties, but also an ongoing investigation for elder fraud tied to his misuse of Max's social security number. The court sealed Max's credit report, ensuring no one could exploit him again. Justice, in its cold, calculated way, had been served. But as we walked out of that courthouse, the victory felt hollow. Outside, the air was thick with tension. Emily chased after us, her heels clicking against the concrete like a ticking clock. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage and desperation. Her hands were shaking, clutching a crumpled tissue as if it could hold together the pieces of her crumbling world. "Do you realize what you've done?" I turned to face her, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "You destroyed it. I just exposed the rubble." She didn't respond, just stood there blinking, like a light flickering before burning out. Max tugged at my sleeve, his small voice cutting through the chaos. "Are we done, Dad?" I knelt down to meet his gaze, forcing a smile. "Yeah, buddy, we're done." But deep down, I knew the scars ran deeper than any courtroom verdict could heal. That night, as Max slept, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the stack of legal documents on the coffee table. It should have been over. Max was safe, his future protected, but something gnawed at me. 3 months later, the ghosts of my past came knocking. At 6 a.m., my mother's name flashed across my phone screen. Her voice trembled as she delivered the news. My father had suffered a heart attack. "He needs a procedure," she whispered. "But the court took too much. Please, he regrets it. He's asking for you, for Max." I hung up without responding. A week later, a letter arrived from my aunt, containing a newspaper clipping about my father's hospitalization and a GoFundMe link. The top comment read, "Hope the son finds it in his heart to forgive." Below it, a $10 donation from Emily with a note. "I hope he gets a second chance as a father, as a grandfather." Pathetic. Then came the call, the one I didn't plan to answer, but did anyway. His voice was frail, broken. "I don't sleep anymore," he admitted. "I think about what I did to Max. The rock, the way I looked in his eyes. I thought I was being funny. Turns out, I was being cruel. Just like I've always been. There was silence on the line, heavy and suffocating. I don't deserve forgiveness, he continued. But if you ever showed up, maybe I'd still have a chance. I didn't respond. Instead, I hung up and told Max about the custom phone case he made at school. It says, "Only good boys get toys," I said. "That's good," he replied. "What does it mean?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "It means bad grandpas don't have grandsons anymore." Click. I ended the call. A week later, I found myself standing across the parking lot from my old neighborhood. My father sat in a wheelchair, my mother beside him, while Emily handed out flyers pleading for donations. When she spotted me, her smile faltered. "You came," she said, jogging toward me. "I knew you weren't as cold as you pretended." I said nothing. We were wrong. All of us, but we're still family. I shook my head. No, we were a cult where love was conditional and money was currency. And now the God you worshipped, status, control, image, has failed. She flinched, stunned. "If this isn't about money, why does your flyer have a QR code and not an apology?" She blinked, speechless, as I turned and walked away. In the car, Max watched silently. When Emily caught sight of him, she raised her hand to wave. He didn't wave back, didn't even blink. He just looked at her like she was another stranger in the crowd. That moment hit me harder than anything else. Max had learned faster than I ever did. As we drove away, I realized the truth. I hadn't lost my family. I had built a new one. One rooted in respect, honesty, and unconditional love. That night, as Max rested his head on my shoulder during a movie, I finally let go of the weight I'd carried for so long. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment. I was the dad who showed up, the one who broke the cycle. The days after the trial felt like walking through a minefield. Every step forward carried the risk of an explosion, memories, regrets, guilt, all buried just beneath the surface. I tried to focus on Max, on rebuilding what had been broken, but the past refused to stay buried. One evening, as we sat together watching a movie, Max suddenly asked, "Dad, why did they laugh?" His voice was small, fragile, like he already knew the answer but needed to hear it from me. I paused the movie, the room falling silent except for the faint hum of the TV. "Because," I began, choosing my words carefully, "they didn't know how to stop." Laughing made them feel safe, like they weren't part of something cruel. Max frowned, his brow furrowing as he processed this. "But laughing at someone isn't funny. It's mean." He was right, of course. The laughter wasn't harmless. It was a weapon, one that had been passed down in our family for generations. My father used it to mask his insecurities, my mother to avoid confrontation, and Emily to deflect responsibility. They laughed because silence would have forced them to face the truth. I leaned closer, resting my elbows on my knees. "You're smarter than all of them. You know that?" Max looked up, surprised. "Why?" he asked. "Because you see what they couldn't. You understand that being kind is more important than being clever or strong." His eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw not just my son but the man he might become. A man who wouldn't hide behind cruelty or cowardice. A man who would stand up when others stayed silent. That night, as Max drifted off to sleep, I realized something profound. Breaking free of toxicity isn't just about cutting ties. It's about rewriting the rules. Teaching Max that strength doesn't come from power or control, but from compassion and courage. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson would be enough to protect him from the storms ahead. Standing in the driveway that night, with Max's hand tucked into mine, I realized something profound. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite the fear. The weight of what I had done, the fallout, the fractured family, the stares of judgment from people who didn't understand, pressed down on me like a storm cloud. But so did the clarity. For years, I carried the scars my father inflicted, not just on my psyche, but on my soul. And for years, I feared becoming him. But here, now, holding my son's hand after exposing decades of toxicity, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was free. Max looked up at me, his eyes wide and trusting. "Dad, why did Grandpa laugh at me?" It was such a simple question, yet it cut deeper than any accusation ever could. How do you explain to a child that sometimes adults are broken, that they pass their fractures down like heirlooms, hoping someone else will fix them? "Because," I said slowly, kneeling to meet his gaze. He didn't know how to be kind. He thought making fun of people made him strong. Max frowned, processing this. But laughing at someone isn't strong. It's mean. His innocence hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. My father wasn't strong, he was weak. And I refused to let that weakness poison another generation. The days that followed were hard. Every call from my mother felt like a test of resolve. Every flyer Emily handed out seemed like an attempt to guilt me back into silence. But I held firm because I knew this wasn't just about me or even Max. It was about breaking the cycle. Fathers shape worlds. They build foundations or tear them apart. Mine chose destruction. I chose reconstruction. When Max started sleeping better, smiling more, and opening up about his feelings, I saw the power of that choice. A stable home isn't built on wealth or status. It's built on love, respect, and boundaries. Things I never had growing up. One evening, as we sat together reading Where the Wild Things Are, Max stopped mid-page. "Do you think Max in the book is scared?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. "But he goes on adventures anyway because deep down, he knows he's brave." Max nodded thoughtfully. "Like us," he whispered. In that moment, I understood my role wasn't just as a protector, but as a guide. A man teaching his son that strength comes from standing up for yourself, even when everyone around you tells you to sit down and shut up. This journey taught me that protecting your child isn't just about shielding them from harm. It's about arming them with truth. Teaching them that kindness isn't weakness, vulnerability isn't defeat, and courage isn't inherited, it's earned. As I tucked Max into bed that night, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're safe now, buddy. Always." And for the first time, I believed it.